Well, folks, the 2026 midterms are on the horizon, and Democrats are planning how can they take the Senate and House back. We know the party that is in power typically does not have a good time in their first midterms. We saw during Trump's first administration that the Republican Party lost almost 40 seats in the House of Representatives. But in the Senate, it's a little different story. During Trump's first midterm, he gained 1 seat in the Senate. And looking at the Senate map for the 2026 Senate elections, we could say that it is very safe to assume that Republicans are going to have a good year in the Senate, plus they will most likely continue to hold the Senate race. But today, we're going to be looking at what is the best case scenario for the Democrats in the 2026 Senate elections. We know the Republicans could have a great year, the Democrats could have a great year. We are going to be looking at what the best case scenario for the Democrats are. So we're going to go through, take a look at these different safe seats, the lean seats, and really get into the nitty gritty of this. So we're first going to start off with the safe seats. So obviously, you look at states like Oregon, look at places like Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, Massachusetts. These are going to be safe seats. There is no doubt about it. We expect, you look back in 2020 when the last time these elections occurred. In Oregon, the Democrat won by roughly 17.5 points. Dick Durbin won by 16 points in Illinois. You look at New Jersey, Cory Booker won re-election by 16 points back in 2020. Massachusetts, 30 points. Rhode Island, 30 points. Jack Reed, Delaware, Chris Coons won by 20 points. Now, you look at New Hampshire, it's going to be a little different story. Jaheen Shaheen is not running for re-election, but we can expect that all of those Democrat seats will remain in that safe Democrat column. Moving on to the Republican side, you're going to look at states like Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska. These are going to be very safe seats for the Republican Party, where you see the Republicans winning by at a minimum 29.5 points. You look at Montana. I think Montana will be a higher margin than 10% for the Republicans in this race. Ultimately, back in 2020, it was only a 10-point margin of victory, but I believe it will be much better in this upcoming election. You look at Kansas, 11 points. Oklahoma, you have almost 30 points. You look back to Corrin in Texas, 9.5 points, which I think there's a lot that we can talk about in the state of Texas, where you have a primary between Ken Paxton and John Corrin it's just going to be probably the fiercest primary battle we are going to see in the 2026 Senate election. Ken Paxton is coming out hard, swinging for John Corrin. There is no doubt about that. It is going to be very interesting. I think John Corrin, I don't know. There's a lot to dissect here. And President Trump has already come out and said, hey, he's just going to let this play out for right now. He's going to make a endorsement at a further time. Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama, Kentucky, West Virginia. These are all going to be very, very safe Republican seats, as you can see on the map right here. Now, looking at some more of these lean seats, places where the Democrats and the Republicans won by, or I should say the Democrats won roughly by under 10 points. Look at Colorado with John Hickenlooper, 9.5 points he won by. New Mexico with Ben Ray Lujan, who won by roughly about 6 points in that election there. You look at Minnesota, where you had Tina Smith, the incumbent senator at the time, beat out former congressman from Minnesota, Jason Lewis, by roughly about 5 points. And then in Georgia, you had 2 elections. Now, granted, this time around, one of these was a special election for Raphael Warnock against Kelly Loeffler, but in Georgia, you're going to be looking at Jon Ossoff. Jon Ossoff beat out David Perdue. Now, granted, he lost the popular vote in the first round of voting, but because neither candidate reached the 50% threshold in order to win the election, there was a runoff, and in that runoff election, Jon Ossoff was able to run up the score, and I believe he won by, it was just like about 100,000 votes, I think he won by. No, not even 100,000 votes he won by. We're talking like 50,000 votes he won by in that election. And then in Virginia, where Mark Warner won by roughly about 12 points in the state. And with the Republicans, there was a lot fewer races that were closer. Obviously, we kind of went through some of these already. I kind of went out of order. But in Montana, Kansas, Texas, Iowa with Joni Ernst, we're going to kind of see what's going to happen. I expect Joni Ernst to run for re-election, but I think there's something to be said there. She only won by 6 points, and this was a presidential election that was good, very good for the Democrats. The Democrats took control of Congress. They took, expanded their margin in the House of Representatives. They expanded their margin in the Senate. They actually took control of the Senate because of these two flips here in Georgia and then the flip they had in Colorado. And let's just go back to 2016. Okay, Republicans did win a seat in Colorado. Wow, very interesting. But fast forward again, back to 2020, you're looking at places like Tom Tillis in North Carolina, Susan Collins in Maine, 8.5 points. Sidney Hyde-Smith only won by about 10 points in the state of Mississippi. So not as many states that we expect the Republicans for it to be closer in. But this is where the map looks as of right now. These are my toss-up races: Minnesota, Michigan, Georgia, North Carolina, New Hampshire, and Maine. These are going to be the seats. And so first we're going to go through, we are going to talk about what the Democrats have to do in each state to win this state and to have really the win by the largest margin, be the most competitive in the state, and have the best case scenario for the Democrats. So we are going to start off in the state of New Hampshire. In New Hampshire, they already got probably the biggest break they could have got in the state of New Hampshire. Former Governor Chris Sununu came out and announced that he will not be running for this election. Now we know Chris Sununu. This is how good Chris Sununu is. How popular he was in the state. Look at this. In 2020, he won re-election by roughly 31 points. In the same election, literally the same ballot that you had to go fill in with a pencil, you had to fill in, I'm voting for this person, this person. The same group of people who voted for Sununu by 31% also voted for Jaheen Shaheen by 15 points. And they also voted for President Biden, for President Biden by 7 points. He outran the top of the ticket for the Democrat Party by almost 40 points. Talk about being popular in a state. He was had one of the highest approval ratings for a governor in America. He's been very popular there. His handpicked a predecessor won the governor's race in 2024. The legislator, and the executive council are both held by Republicans. It could have been a dream come true for Republicans to see Chris Sununu jump in this race. Now, we know the Democrats, Chris Pappas, who is the representative for New Hampshire's 1st congressional district, initially elected back during Trump's first midterms in 2018. And then the current representative from New Hampshire's 2nd congressional district, Maggie Goodlander, we could see her jump in this race. But I believe Chris Pappas, he will be the nominee for this seat. Now, like we said, for the Democrats to have the best chances, it's already been flushed down the toilet. The best chance doesn't mean Republicans can't win, even though I think it is a lot harder, especially for Scott Brown. He was a nominee for the seat back in 2014. He was a senator from Massachusetts for 3 years. And ultimately, Chris Sununu is not in this race. That is the big thing. Chris Sununu is not in this race. I currently have it. Because Chris Sununu is not in this race, I have this seat going by more than 5 points as of right now. This is where I have it. Now, we are a long ways out. And could Scott Brown have a very, very good candidacy? And could we see a lot of support start to coalesce behind him? Do we see people like Chris Sununu get out there, start campaigning for people like Scott Brown? I think he would be the best candidate as of this point who is left in the race. Scott Brown is going to be the best candidate for the Republicans to run with, but ultimately I think there's going to be a lot of funds that shift out of New Hampshire and into other more competitive states like Maine, like North Carolina, like Georgia, like Michigan, maybe even Minnesota. You see stuff like that where, resources are finite. You have to allocate your resources properly, and if they don't feel like they can allocate them properly in New Hampshire, they're going to leave. So I believe for the Democrats to have the best possible outcome as of this point. It's like the best possible outcome. The Republicans nominate Corey Lewandowski and the Democrats just smoke him. It's like that. That's the reality you're looking at here. But I think with Chris Pappas, I think what has already happened in this race will allow the Democrats to have a very, very good election in 2026. And that's why I have this listed right now, going to the Democrats between 5 to 10 points. As you know, my ratings go slight, which is within a point. You have lean, which is within 5 points, or the margin you win by 5 points, and then 5 to 10 points, and then more than 10 points is dark blue. So this is where we currently are right now. 5 to 10 percentage points is what we believe this margin of victory is going to be. Now moving on to the state of Michigan. The state of Michigan, we already know it's actually really starting to show who is going to be in this race because John James, who is a representative from the state, came out and announced, hey, I'm going to be running for the governor's mansion. Really, support is going to start to coalesce behind Mike Rogers for this race. Now we know Tudor Dixon, she could also jump in this race. And then the current representative from Michigan's 4th congressional district could jump in this race as well. But I truly believe that the best thing for the Republicans is going to be to nominate Mike Rogers. He had a very good showing. You look at the 2024 Senate map, he had a very, very good showing against Alyssa Slotkin. This was an incumbent-less election. You saw Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin versus Congressman Mike Rogers running against each other. He lost the state by roughly about 19,000 votes, even with Trump on the ballot carrying the state by a point and a half. It's like he won the state by 80,000 votes. Somehow Alyssa Slotkin was able to outrun Harris at the top of the ticket and beat Mike Rogers. He has had a very, very close election, which leads Republicans to believe that he could be a viable candidate in 2026. Now, we're going to see what happens. I do believe that he is going to be the nominee for this race in 2026. And we are looking right here, and you can already see hypothetical polling. Over Mike Rogers, Tudor Dixon is leading, but with a sizable amount of the electorate either undecided or voting for someone else. So we're going to see the closer we get to this election, I believe it's going to... And a lot's going to have to do with the sentiment of the country. Where is the country at? Where is the temperature of the country at? But if the Democrats want to win this seat, I think nominating someone like Haley Stevens would be a great way to go about this. I think she would be a, how would you say this, a unstoppable candidate, and not literally unstoppable, but I think she would be a very, very popular. She is a popular Democrat from Michigan. I do not vote for Democrats. I am not a Democrat. But she's a popular Democrat from Michigan. You can't, there's nothing you can say about that. Even looking at the polling, and granted, this polling showed Gretchen Whitmer was still in this race, which we know she's not going to be, which I think if Democrats really wanted to win, Gretchen Whitmer would be in this race, and they'd probably blow it out of the water. Whitmer is a very popular Democrat, but we know she has got her eyes set on 2028. So I think if they nominate Haley Stevens, I think this could be, right now I am still noting it as a toss-up, but ultimately I think there's just a lot that has to play out, especially when it comes to Trump's tariffs. Where do we see large investment from major corporations to reshore certain factions of our manufacturing base? Do we see some of those jobs come back to Michigan? What does the inflationary measures look like due to the tariffs that have been put in place by President Trump? Because ultimately, yes, did he not fully put in his reciprocal tariffs? Absolutely. But he still put in a 10% tariff on all of our trading partners, plus on China. So that's going to be a big one. I'm leaving this as a toss-up for right now, though. Looking at Georgia, the state of Georgia, John Ossoff running for re-election here, won a very, very close election by about, 50,000 votes back in 2020. It was, you want to talk about a close election, very, very close election for the Democrats and John Ossoff. Now, this could be a dicey race. John Ossoff is going to run. Who could be a formidable candidate? I think if the Democrats want to win this seat, they need to somehow convince Brian Kemp that he does not want to run for this race. I've already said it publicly. If Brian Kemp is in this race, this is a lean Republican seat. If Brian Kemp's in this race, this is where we have it. Brian Kemp isn't in this race, it's a true toss-up, and the polling really all shows it. There has been a lot of polling that has come out and now showing that over Brian Kemp beating John Ossoff, the only Republican who would beat John Ossoff in the hypothetical polling. Only Republican. Even here, where you had a generic Republican, this was a very interesting poll right here that we could actually do probably a whole video deep dive on, but John Ossoff came in tied with a generic Republican in a hypothetical polling. But in this same poll, they had taken a poll with Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp was up by about a point or two on John Ossoff in this race. But then when those people in this poll were told that John Ossoff voted against protecting women, females, in female sports, all of a sudden, John Ossoff was about 13, 14 points underwater. So that's something interesting that could be an attack piece for the Republican Party. We know during the 2020 or 2024 election, the transgender ads were a big, big part of Donald Trump's campaign. Spent millions, tens of millions of dollars on those campaigns that were very, very effective. That could be another thing to look at. But if the Democrats want to win here, what they need to do, they need to convince Brian Kemp not to run. Brian Kemp doesn't run. This is a toss-up seat, and I think that would ultimately, if I had to flip a coin, I would say it would be John Ossoff would barely win a race against someone who's not Brian Kemp, especially if the mood of the country and the Democrats are very energized to vote against Donald Trump, and not as many low-propensity conservative Republican voters are not. Donald Trump's not on the ballot. You're not going to be able to pull out as many of those low-propensity voters that you need. That's a reality that the Republican Party has to grasp with moving forward. So that's what I think. If Democrats want to win this seat, Georgia, they need to convince Brian Kemp not to run. Now, looking at the state of North Carolina, which is very interesting, there was some interesting polling that we got out of the Republican primary that showed Laura Trump, who is the daughter-in-law of current 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump, beating Tom Tillis in his own primary by 50 points. And we know Tom Tillis, he has been censured by the Republican Party in North Carolina. I believe 2 times now. 2 times he has been censured by the Republican Party. We know it has been an issue that he has had to deal with. The fact that it's a close race, it's a very nuanced, purpley state, and then when you do things to infuriate your own base, you're not doing what you need to do to really drive your base out to the polls. So I think for Democrats to do good in the 2026 election, what do they need to do? They need to nominate Roy Cooper to be the next governor. That's what they need to do. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. If Democrats are serious about this, for the same reason why if Brian Kemp jumps in the Georgia race, it is a lean Republican. For the same reason why if Roy Cooper jumps in this race, I'm going to put it as a slight Democrat, which would mean Democrats win by a point. So, John Ossoff, he comes out, Brian Kemp doesn't run. We're looking at a slight Democrat advantage. And I say toss-up, but I think John Ossoff might be able to pull it out. You look at North Carolina, Roy Cooper's in this race. This is a slight Democrat advantage in North Carolina. The Republicans have a lot of crap to get together in this state. A lot of stuff to get together. Tom Tillis has a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. There is no doubt about that. My biggest issue that I have with him is on immigration. In 2024, Tom Tillis was one of the senators on Capitol Hill who was pushing for a bipartisan piece of immigration legislation. A piece of legislation that would have gave amnesty to 10 million plus illegal immigrants. And they were pushing hard for it. Thank God it didn't pass. Thank God. Because we didn't need an immigration bill. We needed a new president. And it is very clear. That is, we have seen border crossings drop to the lowest they have been in decades. Decades. With Donald Trump in office. He's not messing around. And he's deporting people left and right. If you're a criminal here, if you are here illegally, you need to leave. Come through the legal process, go through the legal processes to come here like everyone else has. But Tom Tillis wanted to go ahead and push a bill that would have given amnesty to 10 million illegal immigrants. And for those reasons, I think there's a lot of distrust with the Republican Party in North Carolina in Tom Tillis. It's hard to look at your nominee and be like, yeah, I really do support this. Because you don't. People just don't. So, Roy Cooper, Democrats want to have the best case scenario for them. Roy Cooper needs to be in this race. Tom Tillis, the waters are mucky right now, but I think Roy Cooper puts this as of right now, what are we, 18 months out, 19 months out, is a tilt Democrat seat if Cooper is in this race right off the bat, pending anything else happening in the seat. Now we know, state of North Carolina voted for President Trump each time he ran 3 points in 24, about 1.5 points in 2020, and about 3.5 points in 2016. So they have a good history of voting for Republicans, even when it wasn't maybe even when the rest of the country didn't vote with them. We saw here, they bucked the trend. They were the one swing state that voted for President Trump. All of the other swing states were won by President Biden. except for North Carolina. But here's the thing. At the same time in the state, at the same time that Donald Trump won the election in North Carolina, Roy Cooper won his election in 2016. At the same time Donald Trump won in 2020, Roy Cooper won his election by 5 points. At the same time that Donald Trump won in 2024, you had Josh Stein win by 14 points for the governor's mansion. So obviously, there are some statewide Democrats who know how to win here. They know how to win here. And I don't think you should downplay the fact that they know how to win. That could be huge. Now, moving on to the state of Maine and Susan Collins. Now, I think what's the best thing that could happen for the Democrats is Susan Collins drops out of this race and does not run. Now, she's already came out and said she is going to be running. She's a declared candidate as of right now. We know on the Democrat side, Jared Golden, who is a very moderate Democrat in the House from Maine's 2nd Congressional District, is considering a run for this seat to beat Susan Collins. Now, you may say, in the state of Maine, the state that in a presidential election voted for Harris by 7 points, voted for Biden by 9 points, voted for Clinton by 3 points, Obama by 15. Let's see, what is this? Obama by 17. It's like, and even Kerry by 9 points. In a state that, who knows when the last time they voted for a Republican? I guess we could try and see. The last time they voted for a Republican, 1988, George Herbert Walker Bush. In a state that is controlled by Democrats, how have you had a Republican win re-election since 1997? How do you have that happen? Well, we know Susan Collins is a much more moderate Republican. She is not pro-life. There's a lot of, how would you say this, core conservative Republican values that she does not hold. And she's able to cross the line. You know, she is one of 3 Republicans who voted against a partial repeal of the Affordable Care Act. She was the sole Republican to vote against confirming Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, and one of 3 Republicans who voted to confirm Ketanji Brown Jackson. And as a pro-choice Republican, she did draw a lot of scrutiny for voting for Brett Kavanaugh. You know, she was one of 10 Republican senators to vote to acquit Bill Clinton on his first charge, on one of five to vote to acquit him on his second charge. So obviously, she has a history of working across the aisle, not being in lockstep with the Republican Party, and that fares well in the state of Maine. That has fared very, very well for her in the state of Maine. You look at her election back in 2020, she won by almost 9 points. You go back to 2014, she won by 37 points. You go back to 2008, she won by 22 points. You go back to 2002, she won by 16 points. She has a very, very strong history of electoral victories in the state that is controlled mainly by Democrats. So, what is the best thing for the Democrats if Susan Collins doesn't run? But also, I think Jared Golden is a moderate, but I think they trust Susan Collins a lot more. I think there's a lot more support for Susan Collins than one may assume. Now, her margin has been getting slimmer and slimmer, but if she's able to be she's not going to move in lockstep with the Republican Party the next 2 years. If she is a check on the Republican Party, and it's kind of hard because from a national Republican standpoint, you don't want her to be a check, but also if you want to hold the seat, she needs to be a check. So if she's a check on the Republican Party going forward, I do believe that she will win re-election here. I do think Jared Golden would be a very formidable candidate in this race. We know he was elected back in 2018. Let's see, back in 2018 here, flipping this seat, which was held by a Republican. It had been held by a Republican since looks like 2012. It was initially won by a Democrat, and then 2014, that was a great year for Republicans. Nationwide, 2014, repudiation of Obama and everything that he was doing at that time. But obviously, Jared Golden won this election by a point back in 2018 in a competitive district, a district that voted for the Republican candidate by 9.5 points in 2016, then voted for a Democrat by 1 point. You fast forward to 2020, the Democrats, Jared Golden got 6 percentage points. You fast forward to 2020, he got 2022, 6 points again. 2024, it was a much, much closer election where he won by 0.5 percentage point in the state here. but I think he could be a formidable candidate in the state. But ultimately, I think Susan Collins still will win this election. But if she chooses not to run, I think this will be an automatic Democrat pickup. And then last but not least, the great state of Minnesota, where our wonderful Tampon Tim comes from. Now, we know incumbent Senator Tina Smith is not running for re-election here. She announced a month or two back, is not running. This will be the first U.S. Senate election in Minnesota without an incumbent since 2006. And we know how it was in 2006. That was a brutal election between Al Franken. Or excuse me, no, that was Amy Klobuchar's election. I want to look at the Al Franken, who did he run? Was it Norm Coleman, I think? This must be the first time that this won. Actually, it was this seat. Let's go back and take a look at that. It was back in, it was 2008. Excuse me. 2008, Al Franken, Norm Coleman, where Al Franken won by about 300 votes. This was a beaten incumbent senator, Norm Coleman. Wow. That was a brutal race. It was one of the most expensive races statewide in the history of Minnesota. It was insane how much money was spent at the end of the day. Wow, and look at this. It was pretty mixed polling. Wow. But yes, this is going to be there's a lot of factors that are going to go into this election here in 2026. In 2026, you're most likely going to see current Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan will be the nominee for the Democrat Party. Support has already been coalescing behind her. She's picked up Al Franken, who once this was his seat, has picked up an endorsement from him. Keith Ellison, the horrible Attorney General from Minnesota, picked up an endorsement from him. Julie Blaha, the state auditor, picked up an endorsement for him, or for her. Ilhan Omar has jumped out of the race, said she's not going to be running. Kelly Morrison is not going to be running in this race either. Let's see, Melvin Carter, the St. Paul mayor, not going to be running. Tim Walz, Dean Phillips, not going to be running. You have a lot of other big, well-known Democrats in the state. And here's the thing. Really, this race on the Democrat side is between two candidates, Angie Craig and Peggy Flanagan. If Peggy Flanagan is the nominee and Republicans don't nominate Royce White, this could be a huge election for Republicans. They could have a chance to get really, really close in this election. But if the Democrats are smart and they nominate Angie Craig, this won't even be close. This will be it's like Angie Craig on the ballot. I have this as a plus 5 percentage points. 5 to 10 percentage points victory. That's where I see it. Look back. Tim Walz, 22. Now, granted, these were good years for Democrats, and it's probably going to be a good year for Democrats as well. But look at this. Tim Walz, back in 2022, won the state by about 7 points. Go back to 2018. Tim Walz won it by about 11 points. So it's just going to depend on what type of midterm are we really looking at right here. But if Peggy Flanagan, if she's the nominee and the Republicans are smart and don't nominate Royce White, they nominate someone like Adam Schwarzy, who actually just picked up a nomination or a endorsement. I'm surprised they don't have it on here, but just picked up an endorsement from Tim Sheehy, the newly elected senator from Montana. Some other good candidates I think would be very well. Ryan Wilson, he was the nominee for state auditor in 2022. He was the closest Republican in that election. He ran the closest margin along with Jim Schultz against Keith Ellison in the Attorney General's race. Now, it sounds like Jim Schultz looks like he wants... So here's the thing. You have a governor's race and a Senate race here, which that is going to murk the waters up a little bit. It is going to, especially on the Democrat side, reduce competition in each race. It looks like if Tim Walz doesn't run, it looks like Angie Craig's going to run for governor. It looks like Peggy Flanagan is going to be the nominee as of right now. If I had to put my money on someone, it's going to be Peggy Flanagan, which I'm all about that. This lady is one of the most radical leftists in the state of Minnesota. You want to talk about putting tampons in boys' bathrooms? Who was Tim Walz's right-hand lady? You're looking at her right here. You want to talk about how the Democrats in the state spent $17 billion in surplus, and now we have a deficit in the state? You can look at this lady right here. You can look at Tim Walz to pay for their ridiculous social programs. Ridiculous social programs. They have some of the most lax reporting rules when it comes to the state-run medical insurance program. It is just insane. It is insane what these people have done to really screw this state up. Totally have screwed the state. But if Democrats want to have the best shot at winning this seat, if they want it, they need to nominate Angie Craig. Nominate Angie Craig and it's over with. It truly is over with. So this is kind of where my prediction is as of right now, I believe Susan Collins will win for sure within 5 points. I think this could be one of her tighter elections that she's ever won by. I think she will squeak by. Michigan, I think this is a toss-up. There's just not enough information to see right now. But the Democrats, this is basically where the Democrats, if they have an insane night, this is where you're looking at. You're looking at they barely hold Georgia, barely pick up North Carolina, barely hold Michigan, barely pick up Maine, and they secure Minnesota very safely. But here's the worst part for the Democrats. Even if they have the best case scenario for them, they only get to 49 seats. They're still in the minority by 2 votes. Still in the minority. There is not a great place where they can really go at this point. They could maybe try and exploit Texas, if Ken Paxton's at the top of the ticket, but ultimately in Texas, they have so many Republicans that they don't really need to worry about getting independent and Democrat voters out to the ballots for them if they do win these elections. They can solely rely on Republican voters in Texas. Look at Florida. There's a special election with Ashley Moody there. I think it's going to vote for the Republicans by at least 10 points. I don't see it being competitive. You look in Ohio, John Husted. He was nominated to replace J.D. Vance, and now he's got to run to serve out the remainder of the term. You look at Joni Ernst. She only won by, 6 points in 2020 when she ran? Only won by 6 points. That could be a really tight election. It's like, where else? They could go to Alaska. Dan Sullivan, there's ranked choice vote in there. You saw the independent did much better than expected in this race here. Much, much better than expected. So we're going to see what happens. But that could also be a dark horse for the Democrats. But ultimately, even on the best case scenario for them, best case scenario is Alaska's close, Texas is a little closer. Maybe Florida, Ohio's a little closer, Kansas is a little closer, maybe Montana's a little, this is the best case scenario for them. They just aren't getting to even a 50 seat, they're not getting to 50 seats, which would still be a minority because J.D. Vance, but they're not picking up 2 more seats on top of this. They're not picking up North Carolina, Maine, holding Georgia, holding Michigan, holding Minnesota, and picking up 2 more seats. It's just not going to happen. So that is the best case scenario for the Democrats. What do I think it realistically will be? I actually think, based on taking all the assumptions into place, I think this is probably where it will be at the end of the day, is Republicans are going to pick up about a seat. This is where I would put it if I were, I had to assume that Brian Kemp was going to jump in. I have to assume that Roy Cooper may jump in. But Republican support behind Tom Tillis really solidifies. There's a lot of variables that you have to take assumptions on in order to get to this. But this is where I would say is my map as of right now. If I have no toss-ups, this is where I'm at right now. So that's going to wrap things up for today. Let me know your thoughts down below. What do you think is the best case scenario for the Democrats? Is there a seat you would have ranked a little differently in here? Let me know down below, and we will catch you next time, folks.